Separating colors and putting them back together were central actions in the making of Prism by Helen Hiebert and Deadlife by Clifton Meador. Let's explore how these two books, one with minimal and one with maximal imagery, derive meaning from the artist's actions and what the results elicit from the reader. Helen Hiebert is a Colorado-based artist, educator, and author. Working with handmade paper as her primary medium, she creates installations, sculptures, films, and artist books. Long interested in science, light, translucency, and exploring the capabilities of handmade paper, Hiebert developed Prism as an attempt to capture the essence of a rainbow in the pages of a book. The paper lining the box reminds me of sky and water, necessary ingredients to see a rainbow in nature. Bound by Claudia Cohen, the cover of the book draws us in with outlined geometric letters, set against the bright flowing colors of the rainbow. Hiebert's epigraph sets my mind towards the ways color penetrates us beyond the limits of words. The title page further frames the ideas Hiebert explores in Prism. This title is not printed. Rather, it was created as a watermark in the handmade paper. The translucency of the watermark offers a subtle contrast to the physicality of the stitched illustration of a prism. Below the thread, Hiebert offers a clear explanation of what a triangular prism does. It separates light that passes through it into the colors of the rainbow. The multicolored thread of the illustrated prism echoes that separation of light. Moving into the main body of the book, we enter into pages of color. Beginning with red, the rich hues gently transition across the colors of a rainbow. There's nothing printed on these handmade papers. Page after page, we read vast sheets of color. I find myself asking how one reads a blank page. Of course, these papers are not actually blank. They are color, presented for us to experience without distraction. This also keeps me attentive to the physicality of the paper and book. Each page is thin, translucent, and makes the delightfully crisp sound characteristic of Abaca papers. Turning to each new color excites and interests me. When I first read Prism, I hadn't really focused on the color interactions between the pages until I reached the yellows. The paper's translucency allows each color to blend with the surrounding pages. Determined to experience all of the colors, I began to hold each page up for a few extra moments, considering the individual color, and then observing how it changes against the recto or verso pages. As I read further into Prism, my mind raced with questions about light, color, and paper. I wondered about reflected light versus emitted light. Are rainbows emitted light? They result from refracted light. I can see a rainbow's colors, but if I were closer to that rainbow, could I see the transition colors between red and orange or green and blue, like the colors of Hiebert's papers? Can we really separate color on paper in a book? When I caught up with myself, I was amazed by the questions of science, perception, and paper that Hiebert elicited from my mind with such deceptively simple stimuli. Sometimes my attention moves to the deckled edges. Seeing the colorful edges right next to each other also reminds me that color doesn't exist in isolation, and heightens my anticipation of what is to come. The decal edges also keep me close to the fact that this is all handmade paper. Hiebert did many experiments to create her color spectrum by mixing pigments into wet pulp. After selecting the final 24 colors, she made the paper pulp and formed every sheet, which would gradually transition across red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Sometimes a color really sings to me. I can just stop, take in the expanse of it, and feel a deep, visceral response that reminds me of the Georgia O'Keeffe quote at the front of the book. I could say things with colors and shapes that I had no words for. At the end of the book, Hiebert includes a lengthy text that describes the science of rainbows, prisms, color, and light, as well as her own process. She articulates and expands on things that I thought or felt while reading Prism, adding valuable context and detail. For example, I recognized that the book's sequence of colors follows that of a rainbow, and that at the center spread, we move back through the colors in reverse order. I hadn't recognized, however, that the sequencing reflects how colors appear in double rainbows. When I read this in the endnote, I thought, yes, that's exactly my experience with single, double, and even triple rainbows. I'm happy for this wealth of information, and even happier that it's at the end of the book. Hiebert reserved and respected the space for my own joy and wonder of the choreographed colors before telling me more. This book is like a triangular prism, breaking up light and singling out colors. Unlike the ephemeral phenomenon of a rainbow, Prism offers a physical and lasting interpretation that leaves ample time and space for the reader to respond and consider light, color, transparency, and more. Hiebert has captured the magic of a rainbow. Based in North Carolina, artist and educator Clifton Meador's books combine writing, photography, printmaking, and design. His work explores themes of labor and production, and how narratives of culture, history, and place are the basis for identity. Deadlife merges still lives and portraits from 17th century Dutch paintings to examine representations of wealth and identity during this peak economic era. Much of that wealth directly connects to the colonial enterprises of the Dutch East India Company. Deadlife is very imposing and demands much table space. The cover is already unsettling. The monogram engraved on the aluminum spine includes the skull and crossbones, a symbol associated with death since the Middle Ages and piracy since the 18th century. The title and Dutch East India Company flag are not just printed with misregistered colors. They are actually different images and types, layered on top of each other. They suggest something complete, but are actually an unsettled amalgamation of elements. The relative clarity of the cover gives way to an onslaught of text assembled from primary documents. I can pick out words like Dutch East India Company and painting, and French words like vie for life and mort for death. I also recognize that there are words in Dutch. I can't read all of the words here, but I note that they appear to be in the languages of major colonial powers of the era. Meador told me that he laid out the vertical and horizontal words to suggest a textual weaving, as history is made from competing narratives. He said, "Our knowledge of the past is very imperfect, and each individual text, object, or story gets woven into a current understanding, which is always changing and evolving." The texts continue, overlapping with images of ships. I find words like great profit and commodity. In the Dutch language, the name of the Dutch East India Company is Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie. This luscious image spread initially seems calmer than the layers of text, but it's even more disconcerting. I can pick out some details and symbols of wealth, such as fresh fruit and sumptuous fabric, but my eyes move restlessly around the page, trying to parse what I see. Each of these images combines and overlaps multiple paintings Meador harvested from the Rijksmuseum, the National Museum of the Netherlands. My eyes are overwhelmed by the mashed together layers of imagery, especially at this massive page size. In addition to still life paintings, Meador also worked with numerous portraits. These are a little easier to look at because the subjects appear in roughly the same position. But I recognize that what makes it easier for me to see a person results from the homogeneity of these portraits. They are merged together in anonymous and indistinct representations of Dutch individuals in the 17th century. These paintings would have been displayed as evidence of affluence, taste, and social position. They broadcast the owner's identity and wealth. When Meador perused the Rijksmuseum's holdings, he noticed that the paintings presented a staggering record of the display of wealth, and he wondered where that wealth came from. The Dutch East India Company was founded by the Dutch Republic in 1602, in part to protect the state's trade in the Indian Ocean. The company amassed extensive wealth and power through its spice and silk trade in India and the East Indies. These gains, however, came through destructive colonial methods, such as enslaving people, massacring indigenous populations, and burning entire islands to establish their own spice monopolies. Meador noted contradictions between the extreme wealth gained from this violent and extractive colonial power and the liberal and progressive culture of the Dutch Republic at this time, where there was representational government, relative freedom of the press, and tolerance for political and religious dissidents. Meador pointedly connects our current state with this historic era. In his description of the book, he wrote, "The wealth of still lives and portraits painted in the Netherlands during this period points toward a problem with which we still struggle. Capitalism makes some of us rich, but often at the price of enormous suffering by others." Meador frequently elevates photographic and print processes in the creation of his images. For Deadlife, he began by making color separations from high-resolution images available from the Rijksmuseum. He extracted different color information from each painting before recombining the layers into his new amalgamations. Meador derived his colors from the original artworks. Although not exactly cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, the colors of Deadlife are close to those standards of four-color process printing. The results are confusing, eerie, and disconcerting. I am lured into these bright colors intermingling in rich, energetic textures, but I'm simultaneously repulsed by the overlapping mix of legible and illegible in these excessive images. I can see that Meador has been intentional with which painting was printed in black, the most legible of all the layers. When I asked Meador why he chose to print Deadlife on canvas, he explained that painters in the 16th century were transitioning away from painting on panel toward painting on sailcloth. Canvas was also used to make sails during the long ship voyages of the 15th to 17th centuries. The spice and silk trade of the Dutch East India Company was made possible in part by the durability and resistance of sailcloth on long voyages. The final spread drives everything home. I do not like looking at this composite person. Even more than the others, the eyes communicate indifference and superiority. Almost in shadow, a young boy looks at the portrait subject's hand, holding a string of pearls toward them. I presume he is an enslaved person or indentured servant, extracted from one of the colonized lands. The symbols before have been material wealth, like food, fabric, flowers. But on this page, we face a boy taken from his homeland and objectified as callously as the spices, silks, and other commodities. The back cover closes with a symbol of the tulip mania, a fad driven by the wealthy and growing middle class of the 17th century. Behind these tulips are the effects of profits derived from monopoly power, financial speculation, and the commodification of plants and resources native to colonized lands. Like all of the other paintings in Deadlife, the beauty and individuality of each flower are collapsed into a mangled, garish mess. Prism creates an experience of color drawn from science, light, and wonder. Deadlife remixes color and art history in a grotesque examination of representations of wealth. Through very different treatments of color separation, both books lead us to look deeper into how we perceive what is represented by color and image on a page.